Our next topic is about healthy aging, and our presenter, Kahir Lalji, will provide a holistic overview of quality of life through the course of life, including physical, biological, social, mental, and spiritual health. He will discuss the role a community plays on impacting direct social determinants of health as it relates to aging. The concept of loneliness will also be explored, how loneliness can be experienced differently by different communities. Kahir is a community champion and a nonprofit leader. Inspired by caring for his grandparents, Kahir dedicated the last 15 plus years of his life to supporting quality of life of older adults. He obtained a master's degree in Gerontology from Simon Fraser University and is currently the Executive Director of the United Way of Lower Mainland, as well as the United Way Lower Mainland's Provincial Director of Population Health. He was formerly the Provincial Director of the Better at Home program with the United Way of Lower Mainland. Kahir.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you all for making your way out in this beautiful Squamish place. I can't remember the last time I was out here, and I was just reminded of the beauty of Squamish. So thanks for inviting me to speak on healthy aging and loneliness and what that means. And as Robert alluded to, I hold a couple of different portfolios within the United Way movement. I'm the Executive Director of the United Way of Southern Interior BC, ranging from Nakusp and Revelstoke down to Princeton, Hedley, Osoyoos, as well as the Provincial Director of Healthy Aging and Population Health with the United Way of the Lower Mainland. You know, you always think around what's the right topic to talk about, because as you'll see in the next 30 minutes or so, you'll see, I'm sure your heads will nod. So this is all information we already know. It's sometimes just a refresher on some of the ideas and concepts related to the aging process. And I always like to start with, what does it mean to age? There's a predominant thought that aging happens at a certain age, when you turn 55, when you turn 60, when you turn 65. And I encourage us to think about this from a more broader perspective. We age from the time of birth. Some would say earlier, but for the context of this presentation, we age from birth. Every month, every week, every day, every hour is a week, a day, an hour that we're aging. And so we need to think about aging from the course of a lifespan or a life course approach that is marked by different milestones throughout one's life. Birth, different levels of education, some get married, we experience loss throughout the course of one's life course. All of these collective experiences lead towards quality of life in later years. Our careers will fundamentally impact our comfort when we decide we're not going to work any longer. The attention we pay to our physical health, going to see a healthcare provider, will have tangible impacts on our physical health as we get into later years. And so I always start about defining, from my perspective, what we mean by aging. And it's not something that automatically happens when you turn a certain age. As a gerontologist, sometimes, we use the term chronological age, which is based on your year of birth, or functional age, the age of how one feels. I'll tell you a story. I used to live downtown Vancouver, and I used to live on the 30th floor. And I got into an elevator recently, and the comment was, "Oh, I feel 90. My knees are so sore." I felt compelled to say something, so I said, my knees are sore and I'm 36. And I tell you, I'm sure there's a lot of 80 and 90-year-olds who can run a marathon and not have sore knees. But we see this verbiage kind of infiltrate even our daily conversations. How often do we hear the term gray hair associated with aging? If I didn't have gel in my hair, I probably have a lot more gray hair than anybody in this room. And so we really need to think through how this is entering our ethos and the way that we live our lives in public discourse, in policy generation, etc. Then we ask ourselves, what is healthy aging? I think if you ask somebody to define their quality of life or what it means to be healthy, you'll get a different answer from somebody that has been raised and living on in a First Nations community. You'll get a different opinion from somebody that's recently immigrated here. You'll get a different opinion from somebody that was born in Canada. And so we really need to take an individualistic approach to what we mean by health. And you can see there's different forms of health. Health can be the expression of self through dance and song. Health can be the regular physical activity. Health can be learning around how to access resources and services and supporting your mental health. It could be around being socially connected and having people that you can talk to. We know 1 in 4 older people in Metro Vancouver area don't have one person to talk to. So imagine you're going through a life of crisis and not being able to call somebody for any type of support that's required. So there's different ways that one can interpret health and healthy aging. The World Health Organization defines healthy aging as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. And it really focuses on the person, the environment in which they live, and the interconnectedness between the person and their physical, social, and built environments that surround them. So you can think about somebody that lives in precarious housing. Their quality of life or their interpretation of health would be different than somebody that has more comfortable, stable housing. And you can take this example and apply it to the different social determinants of health. According to the federal government, healthy aging is a lifelong process. Lifelong process. It doesn't stop because you have some level of deficiency at age 80 or 85. It's a lifelong process to improving and preserving health and physical, social, and mental wellness. When we started to unpack at United Way how we wanted to define healthy aging, we looked at what the World Health Organization said. We looked at what the federal government and different provincial governments say. And then we went into community and we talked to people that we wanted to serve to ask the question, how you define health. And 3 key elements came out: being connected, being engaged, and being active. And those 3 pillars is what we at United Way consider a definition of healthy aging. So all of the work that we do is in service to keeping older British Columbians connected, active, and engaged in their own communities. And I'll get back to why I'm emphasizing in their own communities. I'm going to introduce you to John, who through his story, you'll find the intersectionality, I hope, of some of the concepts I just spoke about. And I want to acknowledge our partners at the Active Aging Research Team based out of UBC who helped put together this vignette of John.
What I'll usually say is, now, I want you to tell me what you want me to sing. And I say, in your heart, there's a song, a special song. The first time you met your sweetheart, your first love, there's a song attached to it. And if you'll think back and let me know what that is, maybe I'll be able to sing it for you. I have for years been entertaining at senior complexes and that. I'm fortunate because of my belief system. I can be alone without being lonely. Therefore, I have a duty to go and be with those who don't have the same feelings, who are alone. Once I got involved in the senior center, I looked around, the pool attracted me. It's a gentlemanly atmosphere. You get to know each other. It takes a little while, and then it'll open up.
Age and not having my glasses.
It keeps us not only physically active, but mentally active. Started breaking down about 15 years ago. A couple of heart attacks, collapsed a few times. I did die at least once. Of course, I'm my own worst enemy, as you can see, because I've let my weight go over the years. Up and down and up and down. You want to know about a diet? I'll tell you about it. I can't expect to exercise now like I did 30 years ago. And I exercised all my life, believe it or not. But the fact is, any kind of activity is good, better than being sitting there, sedentary. Nothing wrong with that at times. But apart from that, the more I can walk, if I can get into the swimming pool, you know, it's just wonder. I was in swimming yesterday with my 5 grandchildren. That's fairly active. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Hallelujah.
So a couple of things that stood out for me from John's story was, one, he found something that gave him a sense of purpose and meaning. Singing songs for people that didn't have anybody to turn to. I don't know if you could catch it with the sound, but he also said, because of my faith, I can be alone but not feel lonely. And we'll get back to that in a second. He also talked about the importance of both mental and physical health when he was playing billiards. And the fact that there's another gentleman that he can go and do quote unquote guys things with was really an important indicator of his quality of life. And so I wanted to share John's story because it takes a very individualized approach to how he perceives himself to be healthy. Not just physically, but a holistic quality of life, holistically healthy. I'll make a sidebar note here saying we know that older men statistically have the highest rate of suicide and the most violent form of suicide. We also know that older men, and I'm generalizing here, this is not the case for all men, myself included, but generally speaking, older men interact differently than older women. There are studies that show women prefer to interact face to face, where men actually prefer to interact shoulder to shoulder. And so when we take a look at some of these nuances, the built environment becomes really important to foster that type of communication and collaboration. Learning and having conversations around sensitive topics are more likely to be successful shoulder to shoulder for men when they're shooting pool. Whereas that may not be the case for older women, as stats have told. Again, I'm generalizing, but there's variances for everybody, but studies and statistics have demonstrated this to be the fact. I'm going to just provide you with some information around why this work is so important. We're all here today for a particular reason. We're all watching and tuning in for a particular reason. And why is this important? We know that older people who live on their own are 4 times as likely to be in poverty. So when we look at socioeconomical status as a predictor of health, we know those that live alone are 4 times likelier to experience poorer quality of life because they live in poverty. We also know that as of today, 33% of single senior women and 22% of single senior men live in poverty. I'll contextualize this by saying we know women have an average life expectancy 7 to 9 years longer than men. So that explains one of the reasons. But we can aggregate this to say 1/4 of the population are single and live in poverty. We also know when people are isolated and lonely is not there, but I'm adding lonely in, older people are at a greater risk of Alzheimer's disease, cognitive illnesses, as well as chronic illnesses. One of the main reasons older people are malnourished is because they don't want to eat alone. One of the main reasons family physicians put failure to thrive when older people visit emergency rooms and family doctors is because older people go in because they want somebody to talk to. When we talk to crisis line volunteers and they take calls in, the vast majority of older people that submit their calls is because they want a human voice on the other end of the line. And so initiatives like men's sheds, initiatives like some of the ones I'm going to talk about in a bit here, all aim to kind of break down that barrier so that people have people to talk to avoid not only mental health illness, but some of the other chronic illnesses that we don't typically associate with loneliness. Sedentary lifestyles also is a huge contributor to one's physical health or one's health. Now we know there's cost benefit around keeping people healthy and reduction in healthcare services. But people are more inclined to be active if they have somebody to be active with. People are more likely to go for a walk if they're going to get a call and say, let's go for a walk. People are likely going to, and let's be clear, being active means different things for different people. For John, being active was going to the pool with his 5 kids, or playing billiards, or 5 grandkids, or playing billiards. For some of us, being active means going for a 2K, 5K, 10K walk or run. For some people, being active means that they're getting out of their bedroom and going into the kitchen. So the idea is to increase activity, regardless of what that looks like for the individual person. And again, people are more motivated to take that step when they have people in their corner, asking them, talking to them, working with them. I would just want to take a minute now to just talk about the difference between isolation and loneliness. And if you've ever heard me speak before, either on any media outlets or in any of my op-eds and papers, you'll see that I make a very big distinction between isolation and loneliness. One can be surrounded in a room of people, but still feel lonely. One can live on their own and not have a social support network, but not feel lonely. Isolation is the external descriptor of what it means to be not surrounded by people. Loneliness is the internal subjective feeling of how you feel because of that. And there's many reasons for this. People who are introverts may prefer that type of lifestyle. Faith is a huge piece of keeping people well and not feeling alone. But we need to be clear that because somebody is isolated does not necessarily mean they're feeling lonely, and vice versa. And that the experience of loneliness, how we feel and experience loneliness, is different for every single person. I'll give you a couple examples. Why is it different for people? When you think about healthy aging and quality of life, there are four key components: physical health, social health, mental health, and spiritual health. Now, if you ask me personally, my spiritual health quadrant would be like 33%. Some people would really pay more attention to their physical health. Some people, their mental health. Some people, their social health. So the importance you place on each of these quadrants is really dependent on each individual. But it's the collective that make up one's quality of life. These 4 components of quality of life are influenced by social determinants of health: access to healthcare, education and literacy levels, environment and your built environment and your feeling of safety, mobility and transportation, housing or lack thereof, and access to culturally appropriate nutritious food. You can imagine if 1, 2, 3, 4, all 8 of these are lacking from your life, how that can inextricably impact your physical health, social health, mental health, and spiritual health. A prime example is, when I visited about 500 communities across Canada, from villages of 200 to larger metropolitan areas. We know people that live in rural BC are disproportionately impacted just because of lack of transportation, lack of healthcare. And so we really need to be cognizant from a policy and program level that we're sensitive to all of these nuances that impact social determinants of health. I'll let you read the quote on your own, but one very interesting piece of our work is that we are committed to learning from the people we serve. So we work in 4 of the largest First Nations communities in British Columbia: Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Gitxsan Nation, Stolo Territory, and Cowichan tribes on the island. When we went in there, we learned really quickly that our slogan, keeping seniors independent, did not resonate with elders in First Nations communities. Because as you can see by her quote, they're like, Kahir, we value interdependence. We value going together in car rides together and doing activities together. It's a part of our ethos and value system to have interdependency across different generations. And so you see a cultural nuance enter the fold here. Another incredible learning for us is working with the deaf and hard of hearing community. And when we think about community, it's not just a community that's defined by geographical boundaries, but it's a community that's also defined by a group of people with shared experiences, shared values, shared beliefs. So if you look at the deaf and hard of hearing community, they have different levels of abilities than those that can hear. And so being able to communicate, being able to be socially connected with people in your own community is incredibly important to one's own perceived quality of life. And I share these examples because as we move forward in developing programs and policies, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. We need to be embedded in community to learn from and with the people that we're serving. I spent a little bit of time on theory. I just want to give a snapshot of some of the programs and services that we've worked with different levels of government in implementing to help address some of the challenges of access to social determinants of health and loneliness that we've seen. The first point I want to make is that we are intentional in our reach. So whether you live in the village of Grand Isle with a population of 298, where 165 residents are over the age of 65, to larger metropolitan areas, one of the key pet peeve phrases I hear when I go and advocate is, well, people decide to live in risk if they decide to live in a community with little to no resources. And my response is actually no, people decide to live at home. This is where they've been brought up, this is their home, this is their community. And so it's really important for us to be able to recognize that and be able to invest in programs and policies regardless of the size or geography or the communities that we're serving. Some of the programs that we've implemented is called the Better at Home program, which is in 200 communities across BC. What I would highlight on the Better at Home program is that it's a volunteer-based model. And the importance of the volunteer-based model is that it goes from a service provider, service receiver relationship to a community of caring approach. So we've seen when Better at Home volunteers want to take somebody grocery shopping, it's not a service. It's, hey, Joanne, I'm going to the grocery store. You want to go out for the afternoon? So it becomes a natural relationship builder in communities. Yes, these services are provided. It facilitates conversation with people. It provides opportunity to identify early intervention for people that may be experiencing neglect, abuse, malnutrition. And so it really allows a natural, organic way for more able people to interact with less able people. And so for us, the volunteer model of some of this work is super important.
In First Nations, for me, it's like keeping the place clean, like dusting.
It means that I have energy to do the other things that make life worthwhile.
When I lost my driver's license, I was finding it very, very difficult to get around and do things. And when I heard about this organization it sort of filled a gap that I really needed. It's only once a week, but it does get you out.
We just wanted to provide an example of how transportation, how not being able to clean one's house, how not being able to go for grocery food really impacts one's quality of life. I'll end on this note. One of the findings through the pandemic was the use of technology, and I'm sure this has become clichéic, I'm sure we've heard this over and over and over again. But I really wanted to kind of pay homage to the experiences older British Columbians have had in embracing this digital divide. Because I do think this is something that's going to push on after we get through the pandemic. And I'll end with this one story. His name was Tex. He lives in northern British Columbia. He was married to his wife for 50 years. They were each other's network. They've never left each other's side. Neither of them had internet, they don't have email, they never had a cell phone, they lived in a rural community. His wife got COVID. His wife was put into the hospital. Obviously, he could not go visit his wife. Imagine what that did to both, not only their physical health, but they wouldn't eat, they wouldn't talk, they wouldn't sleep, they wouldn't go out and be physically active. We provided both of them a smartphone so they could talk to each other. 2 weeks later, his wife passed away. The only memory Tex has right now is those last 2 weeks when he was able to talk to his wife. And I provide this story because the idea of being socially connected, whether it's through Better at Home, whether it's through digital learning, whether it's through men's sheds, whether it's through any myriad of programs that exist, the idea of being connected is a huge indicator of one's quality of life and the way one perceives themselves to age. I'll stop there. I'll see if there are any questions at this point.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And the question I have here is, there tends to be a tendency for a lot of programs to have one policy, one fits all. I know from our experience in the Man Shed, as we reach out to people of our demographics, there's a lot of guys, some guys you touch, some guys you can't touch, these sort of things, they're not interested. Some guys are just dying to get involved. Given that loneliness can impact different people in different ways, what approach would you suggest to make sure these programs are meaningful and to the community you're serving? So how do we diversify?
Thanks for that question. I was on a task force meeting yesterday where we talked about ageism and elder abuse. Some of you know it was Elder Abuse Day earlier this week. And we were thinking about how do we elevate the profile and awareness on some of the issues facing older people. We were talking about marketing campaigns, we were talking about policy development, and what was missing from the conversation was the understanding that older people are not a homogeneous group. Not everybody over 65 does not fall into a single category. We would never assume that of people in their 20s, 30s, or 40s. And why do we assume that of people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s? And so, from my perspective, it comes from policy level. It comes in the way that we are marketing programs and understanding our audience. And so we need to be able to allow for flexibility in funding models. We need to allow for flexibility in policy development. We need to be able to allow for community conversations. All of the work and programs that we developed did not come from my team and I sitting in a boardroom at the United Way office. This came from going into community and having conversations with diverse representative of older people and saying, what's missing in your community? What will get you out? And it's those nuggets that should be informing policy and programs, not vice versa. And so I think, I do want to recognize the provincial government and their foresight in investing in the community-based senior services sector, because I think there's some visibility into the importance of making sure that the work that we do is relevant to the people that are being served, and allowing room to change the nature of funding and programs to meet the needs of diverse populations.
Having been involved in social support and community support activities in my career, one of the concerns that I've often had is that not-for-profit organizations and community service organizations often seem to work in silos, separated from each other. And it seems to be very difficult to bridge those gaps and to get people to work in union with each other. Do you want to comment on that and tell us how United Way contributes to the potential to break down these silos?
First of all, thank you for your service in the sector and to the people that you served throughout your career. I wish we had a whole week to unpack that question. I'd go out to say it's funders and policymakers that sometimes create these barriers. There's a limited number of resources available, and it leads to competition. It leads to competition of funding, but it also leads to competition of talent and people. We know that talent retention in the nonprofit sector is also a huge concern. About 2.5 years ago, I went into a community, mid-sized community, probably about 40,000 or so, and there were 4 senior centers on the same block, and they didn't talk to each other. They had no clue what the senior center across the street was doing. This was a result of exactly the point that you've identified. They would apply for the same funding to the same funders, and there would be competition around it. So it's easy for me to stand up here and say, we need to collaborate. But what does that actually mean? And so in 2017, we held Canada's first Summit on Aging for the community-based senior services sector. And we heard from 400 delegates around certain key priority areas, of which unequal distribution of funding was one. And so I would actually say the issues that you've identified are heightened in areas of the province where there's less resources and investments. And so the first thing we did is to make sure that we had geographical representation. We made sure that we included rural BC intentionally to receive funding and investments to address in a very technical manner the challenge. We've also asked organizations to collaborate in different ways, not just about seeking funding, but around what you do best. We know that a lot of organizations will put together 10-page applications for $5,000 worth of funding, and often have to go to mission creep and scope creep in their mandate to be able to get that $5,000. And so really being able to understand what is the funding landscape and how organizations are required to work together. And so we need to balance the multi-agency model to the model where agencies are being responsive to a particular service. There's no answer to your question. The answer is, this is an ongoing conversation. One technique that we've used is to demonstrate that the work our sector does is really upstream preventative health programming. Northern Europe invests much more money in social and community care than they do in healthcare. In North America, that's reversed times 1,000. I'm exaggerating, but you get my point. And if you're able to kind of balance out the sectoral investment, I think we'll see a return of investment, but that's not going to happen in one kind of election period. It's going to take 5, 10, 15 years to actually see the return of investment. So our work on intentionally calling us the community-based senior services sector was intentional because as a coordinated unit, we play an important role in the health promotion prevention side. And I think that is starting to become really relevant as we see the impact that it has. One of the programs that we have, a therapeutic activation program for seniors in Creston, BC, demonstrated that in 1 year of the program, 4 participants avoided institutionalization. That program paid for itself and then some, just by seeing effects like that.
Thank you. You did a great job, I think, on explaining the difference between loneliness and isolation. In terms of men shed and men, are there any insights or that you have from your experience and research, particularly about men and loneliness?
That's a very interesting question. I shared some stats earlier, but what I'll say is in the existing programs and services in the nonprofit sector, 93% of those that participate are women. So we see a large disproportionately represented participation. We know that the older adult population is not 90% women. So there's a disproportionate representation in those that attend community-based programs and services. And I congratulate Australia and the UK who have had so much foresight around this over the course of the last few years to develop national men's sheds initiatives. And we're very excited around the future of men's sheds in Canada, as you may know. But it's really important, again, for us to take that individualistic approach. I'll even go one step further in saying, if you look at older men, there's a whole spectrum of experiences older men have. Those that may be widowers, those that may have recently immigrated from a place where they've experienced trauma and abuse, those that are in different levels of socioeconomic status. And so being able to connect at a real grassroots level for us is an important way to understand the factors that lead to individual men loneliness and how we can respond. And I'd encourage us to even think, when we think about men's sheds, does it look and feel differently in different communities based on the characteristic of men that would participate? If we were to have a men's shed on a First Nations community, what would that look like? If we were to have a men's shed in South Vancouver or Surrey, where there's a lot of Southeast Asians, what would that look like? And so being able to infuse appropriate programmatic pieces into the work helps to generate a space of comfort. And it's in that space of comfort we found that we hear real authentic feelings. I wouldn't come up to you right now as friendly as you are. I wouldn't say I feel really lonely. It's going to take time for me to get to know you, to maybe shoot some pool or grab a meal before I'd be like, I've been struggling with feelings of loneliness. And so I feel like those are some of the approaches that we may be able to take.
One of the things you spoke about was poor nutrition and people not wanting to eat alone or not being able to eat alone. I think one of the fears that my wife has is that if she predeceases me, that I will be an object of poor nutrition because I'm not domesticated very well. In one community, there was a group that ran a cafeteria. I think it was a subsidized cafeteria offering meals 3 nights a week or 4 nights a week or something for seniors. I don't know how long that lasted, but as I've thought about my personal situation or potential situation, I thought, boy, that would be something that would be great, where nutritious meal, not what I want to order from the menu, would be offered on a regular basis. Is that something that has been done in other communities? Has the United Way supported that kind of thing? If so, what's the success rate and what's the response rate?
So access to food is a global issue. We know that families, young children struggle with access to food, older people struggle with access to food. And access to food has few issues. One is the actual physical access to it. transportation to get your groceries, having the resources to purchase your groceries, having the wherewithal to go home and make a warm meal. All of these are factors to access to food. I would say culturally appropriate, nutritious food. The pandemic heightened this for so many people. Older people, personal opinions aside, but the requirement for older people to not leave their homes fundamentally impacted access to food. People lost their jobs, fundamentally impacted their access to food. As a response, we have developed over 50 food hubs across the Lower Mainland, which is now being scaled out to the province. And for us, it was really important to work with other partners like food banks, but to have a local community feel, so that people in their own community had somewhere to go to rather than a centralized area to pick up food. And so there are many seniors agencies, or many community-based seniors agencies that offer hot lunch programs, that offer even educational programs on how to cook a simple, healthy, nutritious meal. But the resources in this part of our sector nowhere nearly meets the demand for the services that are required. And it is a key priority area that was indicated to us at a 2019 Summit on Aging. Our next Summit on Aging will be in April 2022. And we will be unpacking other key priority areas, and my sense is access to food is going to be a key priority area. I will say two other things. One is this requires a tri-government interministerial approach around access to food. It has health implications, it has poverty implications, it has transportation implications, and so it requires people coming together to unpack this issue. When we launched Safe Senior Strong Communities, our pandemic response for non-medical services, grocery delivery and drop-off of hot meals was one of the services. It was the most in-demand requested service. And I think for us that demonstrated the need for us to elevate the conversation around this. So yes, things exist, agencies do it, there's local food hubs, but it's part of the solution, and we need to continue the conversation. And I look forward to having your thoughts if you guys can come to the summit.
One last question, Kahir. Why do you think healthy aging is an important topic for our Men's Shed's Health by Stealth series?
In my humble opinion, and I'm biased, healthy aging is so important for all of us. First of all, regardless of our age, we should always be planning for a future, so that we can avoid crisis. But as we age, especially older men, our holistic health becomes even more important to our quality of life. So series like this allows for education, for awareness, for a deeper understanding of the impact of the work. A few years ago, somebody told me that, oh, nonprofit work, it's great work. You guys do some airy-fairy good stuff. And I said, no, we don't do airy-fairy good stuff. The work that organizations and programs like Men's Sheds do have fundamental impact on the quality of life of people that participate. We know people have avoided suicide by participation. We know people have avoided hospitalization by participation. We know people have become one with their faith as a result of participating in programs like this. And so being able to understand our holistic approach to aging as we age is really important. And there are gender specificities, some cross genders, but there are also gender specificities. And this particular series, I hope, has the intent of shedding light and awareness and education on some of those impacts, so we can continue to do the incredible work that we do in the communities that we serve. I'm sorry, I'm so over time, but I would be remiss if I didn't say one last thing. Last month, I had the incredible honor of visiting the Men's Sheds in the Okanagan and speaking to the men that attended the Men's Sheds. As much as I think I knew about Men's Sheds, as much as I think I knew about the sector, I spent 3 hours of just learning. And what appealed to me particularly was the dynamo impact of this particular men's shed. So not only is it situated on this acreage amidst mountains in a valley, but the men built accessible planters so people with different levels of abilities can go and plant food to give themselves a sense of purpose and meaning, and that food was given to hungry kids. So you see a whole ripple dynamo effect, and I'm sure there's many examples of this across the province. This was one I particularly recently visited, but I think it shows the impact that programs like men's sheds can make across demographics and across different realms of health. I hope that answered your question.
Certainly did. Thank you.
So, Kahir, we really appreciated your very, very informative talk today. It really wrapped a lot of things up, and your articulation and your view of the bigger picture. And Squamish Man's Shed, we're very proud to have partners like the United Way, particularly some of the local folks who've given us a lot of services. And again, we in turn provide services for them. So it is a back and forth, because we do see ourselves as not just a consumer of services, but we're also a service organization. And it's through giving out services and what have you that we feel good and better about ourselves, and it's part of our personal growth. So on behalf of the Squamish Man's Shed, I'd like to pass on a certificate of appreciation for your effort to coming all the way up here and informing us, and a little treat from one of our highly rated local chocolate producers.
Thank you
Once
very
again,
much.
thank you very
It was
much.
an honor for me to be here, and thank you for all that you did.